Hi everyone, my name is Dragos, and in today's lesson, we're going to talk about the arms. We spend a large portion of our lives practicing this instrument and using our arms, but often we don't necessarily understand or know the mechanism very well, and that could lead to potential issues in the future, such as misuse, repetitive stress injury, and even worse injuries. So in this lesson today, we'll be covering the basic structure of your arm. I'll be talking about the main areas, the four joints of the arm, and how those help you in moving better. Hopefully, you'll get to feel a lot freer at the instrument, prevent tension and injuries, and essentially make you a better player. I divided the lesson in sections surrounding the four main joints of your arm. At the end, I will also show you a couple of exercises to restore natural balance and promote healthy movement in the arms. So, to play a little test of knowledge, um, I want you to think for a second if someone asked you to draw the bony structure of your arms, how would you go about it? And in fact, if you go into the workbook and download it, print the first page and try to draw the bones of your arms as you see them. I know it's very easy to cheat and go look up online how the arms look. Try to rely only on your, how should I say, on your memories, on your information. You can palpate, you can feel it. Try to draw the bony structure of your arms as well as you can, and then come back to this video. Okay, I hope you're back from your drawing. And if I get a bit of drum rolls, here's a photo, here, on how your arms actually look. And if you take a look at it, you might notice that I've also included the shoulder blade and the collarbone in the arms. So you might want to ask yourself at this point, how do I perceive my arms? Do I think of these two as part of the arm? What about the wrist? What about the finger bones? How similar is my representation of the arm to the actual anatomical truth, which is this picture that you see right here? Okay, so you might be asking at this point, okay, Dragos, but how does this help me play better, move better, or even stop hurting if I'm already injured? And think about this for a second. Whenever you play, you use your whole arm. I'll say this again. You really use your whole arm for a movement. Think of athletes, for example, like a swimmer that is doing very beautiful large motions. Imagine if he didn't think about the shoulder blade or the collarbone as part of the arm. The movement would suffer, right? Now, we don't do as big movements as a swimmer would normally do, but nonetheless, we still use the whole structure. So it's very good to get at least a basic understanding of how the structure works. If you want to play free of any unnecessary tension or physical pain, you really need to rework your body map. Now, body map is not to be understood as a metaphor. It is actually a neurological map in your brain, a cabinet file if you want, that contains all the information about your arm, how it moves, how it feels, how it looks, how big it is, and so on. Now, a big chunk of our perception of the arms comes from sources that might be faulty. You either see a cartoon when you're growing up, or daily habits, or misleading words and images. Your perception of the arms changes so much that it doesn't work in accordance with the actual anatomy of your arms and body. And it's very interesting that when we're talking about moving and even playing, the body is almost always going to follow the body map, not the anatomy. So it's important to get both of these on the same page, so to speak. It is this disconnection that causes a lot of injury and misuse among musicians. So let me give you an example. You'll notice that people that do not necessarily include the collarbone or the shoulder blade as part of the arms, they move as if, I like to use this metaphor, the Barbie doll. So what they do, they tell the brain basically to lock any movement happening there, since that's not part of their arm, right? And so they'll be moving very tensed all the time, just from here, because that's what their perception of an arm is. So let's try and dispel this myth right away. Now imagine with that pattern of tension just how much you restrict the pathway of the nerves that travel all the way from your skull to the neck, underneath the clavicle, to the very end of your fingertips, to the blood flow. Muscles are getting tensed in their attempt to basically block movement that is natural. And all of that because of misuse of our arms. I use the word misuse because we did not integrate the full structure of our arms into our body map. And really, body mapping is the work of changing our perceptions of movement and our bodies through rediscovery, movement exploration, and balance, which is not too difficult to get, but it requires a bit of work. And the first thing you need to do is to return to the natural state of the anatomical reality. So let's begin where all the movements start in the arm, and that is the ST joint, or if you prefer the fancier name, the sternoclavicular, which is basically the meeting point between your clavicle and the sternum. You'll see that I attached here a funny sticker. That's just to help you find this place better. So if you trace your collarbone all the way down, you'll notice you end up into a little bump. That right there is the point where your entire arm connects to the body. And in fact, that is the only joint where your arm meets the body. I'll repeat that again. The only joint where your arm meets the body. Everything else is free to move, all more or less floating, ready to help you swim and play the fastest breaststroke scales that you could possibly do. So it's important to get this right away, especially for us as guitarists, since we use the arm slightly different. For the left hand technique, we move quite a lot, up and down, whereas in the right hand, since the forearm is stationary over the guitar, this doesn't get the benefit of movement as much. And it's quite a common tendency among guitarists to block movements here, mostly because you're focusing on your right hand fingers, right, and the fingerings. And so, in fact, it's so interesting. When I first discovered this joint, I was shocked that there was movement there. And in fact, when I moved the right one, I would pop all the time. Not as much as on the left. Okay, so let's explore the range of movement at this joint. If you go ahead and place your finger or on where I showed you the joint is, you'll notice that it moves when you go up and down. It also moves when you go forward, backwards, circular motions. So you get quite the range of mobility there. So you can actually do it at the guitar too. If you keep your finger there, and we'll do some string crossings. And notice, as you move towards the sixth string, there's movement at the collarbone too, because the entire arm moves. And that proves my point again of why you should include this in your perception of the arm. In order to understand our next joint and place of movement, we need to really talk about the shoulder blade first. So here's a shoulder blade. That's not an actual human shoulder blade. It's just a model. To me, this was a source of so much pain, injury, and misery, mostly because I mapped it as flat on the back, way bigger, and not moving at all. Also parallel to the back, which is nothing like the reality of it. So imagine trying to move just how I described it to you. It was very difficult. And I ended up putting a lot of strain and stress on the muscles surrounding it, and it caused me lots of pain. You can always go back on the previous pictures that we talked about, just so you get a better sense of the whole arm structure whenever you feel like. So this is the back of it, and this is the front. You notice it's slightly bent, not straight, and that is to facilitate the gliding motion as you come to swim or play guitar. If it was straight, that would be a lot more difficult. And this is something that, as I discovered it, it just clicked in my mind. It's like, oh, it makes perfect sense. Yes, I'm supposed to move that way. Try to get really familiar with your shoulder blade. Look up pictures or videos online. If you have a friend, go palpate it on the back. They should be free to move even when we breathe. Yes, they move when we breathe, unless we, of course, hold them by applying tension, and that obviously leads to injury. The arms are meant to be suspended over the torso, and that's really what allows for this beautiful freedom of movement. So the scapula plays a couple of roles. It protects the lungs in the back, it helps us with extended motions, and it's the meeting point of the second arm joint, which is the glenohumeral joint. So this right here is the glenohumeral joint, to what people often refer as the shoulder. And I have a problem with the use of that word, mostly because if you went and asked 10 people where their shoulder is, you'd probably get 11 different answers. Some might say here, some might say here, some might say here. It is not, the use of that word does not accurately describe a place of moving at the arm. So instead of that, let's actually try and find this on our arms. So the way you find it, if you bring your arm up and you go right in your armpit, if you scoop around at the middle of it, you should feel a bump, something that it's harder. As you move the arm up and down, you should feel that bump disappearing, coming back again. That's basically this that you're palpating right now, the movement here. So the socket is the shoulder blade, this being the back view of it. Don't imagine it as a closed, tight structure. And it is rather small, and that's in order to allow movement of the arm. You see, it's about the size of a quarter. I used to map it as something that just holds everything tight in place. And it is true, you have muscles and tendons and ligaments surrounding it, but it should be free to move in a quite extended range, just as when you actually throw a ball. And again, we don't use these large motions when we play, but you certainly don't want to apply patterns of tension because that will end up hurting your arm. And you might notice how this joint is a lot more to our sides that you might have perceived. I used to map it right at the front. I was trying to move like this, so awkward. The joint is pretty much to the sides, much like the ears. They're on both sides of our head, and so is this joint. And this gives you a more 360-degree openness when you play the instrument, which is crucial because most of the time we're here. We lock in, sometimes we twist the spine, and we tend to block out the rest. And that also causes tension, patterns of tension in the muscles. So it's important to get this 360 view of the joint being to the side. Now that we're here, I should mention something interesting happening between the shoulder blade and the humerus when we move. And that is called the humeroscapular rhythm. It's a naturally occurring sequence where, as the arm moves, the shoulder blade follows in movement. And I have my little friend over here. And I'm gonna try to demonstrate over this way. And you'll notice, as my arm is ready to make a movement, so does the shoulder blade follow by gliding over your torso. And this is a natural sequence that is important also to when we play our instruments. Both on the left hand, when you shift up or down, the arm moves and then the shoulder blade follows, but also on the right hand. It's this string crossing that's happening. This leads and it follows. So I actually have an exercise to help you get a better grasp of the humeroscapular rhythm. Imagine for a second that you had a red dot or a point at the very end of your humerus, close to the elbow. And think for a second that this is your train and your shoulder blade is the caboose. And I want you to move leading from this point. Both arms, you could just do that. And you notice when you lead from here, it's a lot easier to encourage the shoulder blade to follow in movement. And be patient with yourself if you don't feel movement right away, because patterns of tension that occur over years and years are hard to get in just a few seconds. Be patient with the process. I can guarantee you will feel it following in movement. And then as you get the sense for it, you can lower the range of motion. And you will notice that the shoulder blade naturally wants to follow quite rapidly after just a bit of movement in the arm. It's just another way to add more freedom to your arm structure. Moving on to the third joint, the elbow. This one's quite an interesting one. It's the meeting point of three bones. You have the humerus and then the two forearm bones. the radius, which is on the thumb side, and then the ulna. Essentially, there are two movements happening in this area. We have the opening and closing motion of the arm, which is often known as the hinge, and we also have rotation at the forearm. Now, both are incredibly important in playing guitar, so let's get them straight. The first motion, the hinge, happens when the ulna, which is your pinky bone, is moving in relationship with the humerus. Now, this bump that you're feeling here, which we often call the elbow, right? It's in fact the ulna, the pinky bone. You can trace it all the way till here. And here's a common mismap. A lot of people think of the elbow like the kneecap, where there's like one structure, but the elbow does not work like that at all. You can go back to the picture and see it. It's the ulna that is just gliding up and down in relationship with the humerus. Now let's talk about the rotation of the forearm. There are two rotation actually happening at the arm. The first one is at the glenohumeral, and it's basically this. It's more of a broad general rotation. And the second one happens at the forearm. A lot of people misplace the location of the rotation at the forearm, which is a source to much tension. It could potentially injure you. Some may think that the rotation occurs at the wrist, and they almost make it look like this when they rotate. And in order to really rotate at the wrist, what you do is you're tensing up the forearm muscles, and then you're tightening up as you still try to do the rotation. You notice how my pinky, when I do this, goes up naturally. What happens anatomically is that you have your radius pronate over the ulna. So the bones actually go this way, crossing each other. Now you can try this over your guitar or a table, just placing the forearm and keeping the pinky bone or the pinky side flat. Try to rotate. Kind of like turning the page of a book. Now you can also try rotating at the wrist, like this. And you notice the difference in actual tension at the muscles. You can even see it on the camera. This is from the forearm, which happens pretty much here. This is from the wrist. Very important for both arms at the instrument. When you play here, you want to feel the rotation up there and not somewhere at the wrist, causing you to tighten up. But also in the left hand, when, for example, you're trying to adjust your hand or your student's hand from here to here, don't just simply think of rotation at the wrist. Let the entire forearm naturally rotate, so the wrist is relaxed and open to move however you need it over the fretboard. An interesting concept to follow through is how our arms are organized around the ulna and the pinky. And so, for example, when we do a karate chop, or when we're in the bus and we're holding on to the bar, we have almost a straight line going from the pinky to the ulna. And this is really how our arms are organized. I'd like to say that there's two types of people in the world: the pinky-oriented people and the thumb-oriented people. So you notice the people that are pinky-oriented, their line goes from the pinky to the ulna to the humerus and all the way till the scapula. You have like a straight line going. It's sort of like this. You notice this line goes all the way. And that is important because it works both with your humeroscapular rhythm that we just talked about, as well puts the whole arm in context when you play. I encourage you to try this simple exercise where you trace this line of your arm, the pinky. It puts the whole arm in context, and you can actually apply it onto guitar too, by leading with the pinky. Now, to the thumb-oriented people, you notice that their line is considerably shorter, as it goes from the thumb and it stops here, Quite often, these are the people that don't include the collarbone and the shoulder blade in their map. What they do is they lead with the thumb, they deviate the wrist, a condition called ulnar deviation, which actually causes strain and could potentially injure you, and also messes up with the natural humeroscapular rhythm that we talked about by doing this. So try to notice in your daily movements, or even when playing the guitar, are you a thumb-oriented person or you're a pinky-oriented person? And if you're the thumb-oriented person, I strongly encourage you to come onto the other side and feel the benefits of freeing up the arm when you lead with the pinky movement. And you can do this previous exercise, but also when you bring the guitar to you, start the motion with the pinkies. Watch. Bring the arm, but lead almost as if your pinky was this long. It will help engage the entire arm mechanism. And even now as I do it, I can feel the upper back just releasing from tension and holding. Moving on to the wrist, here's another structure that I, as well many other colleagues that I've talked to, have seemed to map it wrongly. First, the location. Remember how I said that misleading language could cause mismapping of the joints? Take, for example, something as easy as the wristwatch that you usually wear over here where my fingers are. Now, if your wrist was to be here, you'd only be able to do this movement, this hinge movement, up and down. But we already know from playing guitar that the wrist has all these beautiful, has this beautiful capacity of going in all sorts of directions, circular motions too. And that is not really possible if you map its location here. A lot of people misinterpret these two bumps as the actual wrist, when in fact they're just your pinky bone, the ulna, and the thumb bone, your radius. Your wrist is slightly higher than that. And as you can see in the picture, it is right above those two bones. You notice that the wrist is made of 8 smaller bones that allow for many complex movements, circular, up and down, sideways. The wrist itself is not a flat structure, so do not map it only from the outside or the inside. Notice the arched structure of the wrist. That is where the medial nerve and tendon travel through your arm, which is the famous carpal tunnel, all the way to your fingers. Now imagine for someone that maps the wrist as a flat surface, what you actually do, you're sending information into the arm to tense up, so you straighten the area, causing even more tension on the carpal tunnel and potentially, again, injure you. Try to think of it as a dome-shaped arch structure. This has really changed the way I experience playing guitar once I realized. Now, moving on to the finger bones, and I should tell you one of the first mismaps that I discovered was that the thumb has in fact 3 joints. Looking at it from a palmar view from here would almost lead you to think that you have 1, 2 joints. But in fact, if you look at the picture and at my friend here, you see 1, 2, 3 finger bones. We use this every day when we play the guitar. Mapping your finger bones through the inside of the palm could also be problematic. Look, for example, if we follow the creases of our hand as indicators of the finger bones, we have the first one, then we get to the second one, and then when we get to the third one, you notice that anatomically that's not really where your knuckle joints are, which they're a bit lower. And when you play guitar, because you see this side a lot, if you've mapped your finger bones based on the creases of your fingers, you will almost try to play from here. And I used to have this issue, causing lots of tension in the inside and not allowing for full mobility of my fingers. Map the knuckle joint properly, and as well the bass joints and how those actually move with each of your finger. You can try grabbing it in movement. So there you have it, a very basic walkthrough to the bony structures of the arm. To address your body map, take time to explore your misunderstandings. Ask yourself questions, palpate, draw, uh, meet with a friend, and put your hand on their shoulder blades when they breathe. Notice how they move. Chances are that if your body map is faulty, so is your balanced relationship of the arm. So I have a couple of exercises that might help you with this. So here's exercise number 1. What I want you to do is basically take your arms up all the way as close as you can get to the ears and hold it there for a moment. Notice how the muscles are tightening up to hold you there. And gently release a bit down to where you notice that your muscles are not holding as much. And then you do a bit more and stop. You do a bit more. And you keep going down until you feel no work in your back muscles at all. Usually what happens, you end up with your arms in a slightly higher position that you're used to. And this is because we're used to slumping down and dropping our arms this way. What this exercise does, it simply brings you back to the sense of arms floating on top of the torso as opposed to just dropping down. So again, go up, notice the tension, and gradually drop a little, then a bit more, then a bit more, till you feel there's no work in your muscles at all. And you might end up higher than you're used to, but that's a good thing. Just explore that new place where your arms are now. For the second exercise, what you'll do is bring the shoulder blades together, squeeze a bit, and then let them simply glide back naturally. And now without the arm model. Notice how the arms want to kind of glide back to a neutral position. This is just to give you a sense of also this possibility of the arm structure. And here's the third exercise and my personal favorite. What you're going to do is bring the arm up this way. And you can also just massage a bit these muscles because they tend to pull the arm down. Then you're going to extend the arm up, turn it to the side, and simply let it go at a straight angle. What that does is it brings your shoulder blade out and then to the side into a neutral position. It brings the arm back to a balanced, not this way, not rounded forward, but just where it should be, resting naturally to the side. Well, that's it. Hope you enjoyed it and learned something useful today. Also, there's additional resources in the workbook. I highly encourage you to check those out. Thanks, and I hope to see you some other time soon.